Today, a congressman walked into a hearing carrying a list. Not of crimes, not of evidence, a list of questions, so simple, so surgical, that the man sitting across from him had no escape. The target? A think tank operative paid to tell America its own museums are lying to it. The weapon? 3 yes or no questions, and one name that nobody wanted to hear out loud in a congressional hearing. A name that rewrote everything that came before it. And the man who dropped it? Wasn't even the congressman. Let's watch what happened.
Mr. Frost from Florida, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I gotta say, listening to this hearing, I think many of my colleagues would benefit from actually stepping foot in the Smithsonian Institutions, and maybe not just reading talking points from the White House or reading what they're supposed to say. I've been in these museums. I mean, talking about the National Museum of African American History and Culture specifically, it tells the whole story. The ugly and how America and Americans came together to get rid of slavery, to fight Jim Crow. But it tells the whole story. So maybe this committee should do like a field trip and actually go through these institutions to actually see the full story be told, because I would contend that many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have never stepped foot in many of these institutions, at least not in a long time. Director Hartig, thank you for being here. Can you please share a little bit about your experience as a historian?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Frost. I came to history as an undergraduate. I thought I was going to be an English major, but I took my first history class, and I was rowing crew for UCLA at the time, and I hoisted my 10-speed on my shoulder, and I walked up the stairs to the history department, and I declared that I wanted to be an historian. And since then, as a public servant, and as a public historian, in which we look at archives and material culture and museum work and historic preservation work, I've been completely motivated to figure out how then I can best serve the nation, and being the Elizabeth McMillan Director of the museum certainly is the highest calling.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Gonzalez, are you a professional historian?
Actually, I have been paid by publishers to write history, so I am.
Okay, how many exhibits have you curated?
Oh, no, I'm not a curator.
Okay, how many exhibits have you curated? It's a separate question.
I haven't curated any exhibits because I'm not a curator.
Dr. Hartig, thank you. You haven't curated any exhibits, thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Hartig, is your work partisan?
No, sir, our work is not. We don't seek to advance any political agenda.
Yes, ma'am. Does the museum take political sides or have a political agenda?
No, sir.
Does the museum have exhibits that challenge people's views or may make them feel uncomfortable?
History is incredibly challenging, and by then its very nature, if we tell it in its richness, we absolutely, I think, have objects that can make people uncomfortable. And, I hearken back to Secretary Bunch's words that he was told by a sharecropper that, tell the people both what they want to hear and what they need to hear. Mm-hmm. So I think depending on where you are, certainly there can be a level of discomfort.
Thank you. What review process does the museum use before opening an exhibit?
So the museum goes through a rigorous scholarly presentation of the way in which exhibit objects and stories and interpretation relate to one another. That's reviewed extensively. Also, depending on the size of the exhibit, our In Pursuit of Life, Liberty, and Happiness exhibition, our 250 object exhibition for America 250, went through exhaustive review with also peer reviews as well. Then it is presented up to the undersecretaries and often the secretary in conversation with our review. Thank you,
Director. Mr. Gonzalez, who should decide what's in a museum?
I would say that the curator, but also overseen by the leadership of the museum. The taxpayer does spend $1.1 billion in the Smithsonian, so the Smithsonian is accountable to the American taxpayer.
All right, thank you. I have a yes or no question. Should exhibits capture American history as it happened without bias?
Yes.
Was slavery a part of American history?
Yes.
Was Jim Crow a part of American history?
Yes.
Is it important that museums discuss these topics at length so people understand the gravity?
Absolutely, yes.
Do you believe that American art should be consistent with the Trump administration's cultural and political goals?
I have no idea what that is. I cannot comment on that.
Do you believe that American art, or do you believe that the Smithsonian's goals should be consistent with the Trump's administration's cultural and political goals?
I don't know how you define that. I cannot answer it.
You seem to have a long-standing personal vendetta against the Smithsonian that started well before the White House report. And I ask you those questions because I'm concerned about censorship. I'm no historian either, just like you. But I know that Nazi Germany weaponized art and museums to demonize certain groups. Dr. Blight, if Congress or the White House starts deciding historical interpretation, how is that different from political censorship?
It is political censorship. It is political censorship. Their model may indeed be Joseph Goebbels' Committee on Enlightenment, which is what the Nazis called their committee that tried to control museums.
I'm sorry,
Thank
sir.
you. I yield back.
Time's up.
Let me tell you what you actually watched in that hearing. Because it wasn't a debate. It wasn't even really a confrontation. What it was a trap. And the man who walked into it had no idea it was closing around him until it was already too late. Mike Gonzalez came into that room with a mission. He works for the Heritage Foundation, one of the most powerful conservative think tanks in Washington, and one of the primary architects of the policy agenda shaping the current administration. His organization published a report accusing the Smithsonian Institution of promoting what they called a divisive, radical, and historically revisionist narrative. In plain English, they accused America's own national museums of lying to the American people. So let's be very clear about what Gonzalez was there to do. He wasn't there as a neutral witness. He was there as a political operative with a specific target, and Frost knew exactly what he was dealing with. Here is the first thing Frost did, and I want you to watch how deliberate it was. Before he said a single critical word to Gonzalez, he handed the microphone to Dr. Anthea Hartig, the director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. He let her describe, in her own words, what a professional historian actually does: the archives, the material culture, the peer review, the exhaustive scholarly process that every exhibit goes through before a single visitor ever sees it. He built the standard first. Then he turned to Gonzalez and asked one simple question. "Are you a professional historian?" Gonzalez tried to wiggle. Publishers had paid him to write history, he said. Frost didn't flinch. "How many exhibits have you curated?" "0. Now I need you to understand what just happened, because it's easy to miss if you're watching it as a political exchange. He didn't argue with Gonzalez's conclusions. He didn't get into a fight about which exhibits are biased. He established on the record that the man being used to tear down the work of trained historians had never once done that job himself. Imagine someone who has never performed a surgery walking into a hospital and telling the surgical team they're doing it wrong. That is someone using political access to substitute for professional credibility they don't have. And Frost made sure that substitution was visible to everyone in the room. But he wasn't done. The second move was even more elegant. Frost asked Gonzalez a rapid-fire series of yes or no questions. Should museums capture history without bias? Yes. Was slavery a part of American history? Yes. Was Jim Crow a part of American history? Yes. Is it important that museums discuss these topics at length? Yes. Every single answer was yes. Because the only alternative was to say on camera, under oath, that slavery didn't happen or that it wasn't important, and Gonzalez wasn't going to do that. So Frost had him, in his own voice, with his own words, affirming that everything the Heritage Foundation's report was attacking was exactly what museums should be doing, the honest, unflinching telling of America's darkest chapters. Then came the trap. Frost asked, "Do you believe American museums should align their goals with the Trump administration's cultural and political agenda?" And the man who had just answered yes to every single question suddenly had no answer at all. He stumbled. He said he didn't know how to define that. He couldn't respond. Let me explain why that moment is so important. Because it's not just an awkward pause on camera. Gonzalez came into that hearing with a political agenda. He works for an organization with a political agenda. He was part of producing a report with a political agenda. But the moment Frost made that agenda explicit, the moment he asked Gonzalez to own it on the record, the whole thing collapsed. Because if he said yes, he would be admitting that this entire project has nothing to do with historical accuracy. It's about making America's national museums serve whoever is currently in the White House. And if he said no, he would be directly contradicting the mission that put him in that chair. There was no good answer. That is not a coincidence. Frost built a box, question by question, and then closed the lid. That is prosecutorial level work, from a congressman who openly admitted he is not a historian. Now I want to get to the moment that most people will remember from this hearing, because it didn't come from Frost. In his final seconds, Frost passed the microphone to Dr. David Blight, one of the most respected historians in the country, and asked a single question. If Congress or the White House starts deciding how history is interpreted, how is that different from political censorship? Blight didn't pause. It is political censorship. Full stop. And then he went further. He said the model being employed here resembles what Joseph Goebbels built under the Third Reich, a government committee whose entire purpose was to control what museums could say and what narratives they were allowed to tell. I'm not going to throw that comparison around carelessly. The point is not to call anyone Nazis. The point is structural. The mechanism being proposed, government officials deciding which historical interpretations are acceptable, has a documented precedent. And every time that mechanism has been put in place, the result has been the same. History stops being preserved. It starts being manufactured. And here is what that costs, not in theory, but in practice. When political pressure enters the room where historical interpretation happens, it doesn't just change what ends up on the walls. It changes what historians are willing to research. It changes what curators are willing to propose. Because once it becomes professionally dangerous to tell certain truths, people stop telling them. Not because of a ban, not because of a law. Just the slow, quiet realization that some doors are now closed. That is what a chilling effect actually looks like, and you can't see it happening until the silence is already there. I want to come back to something Dr. Hardig said that I think is the most important line in the entire hearing. When Frost asked whether exhibits might make visitors uncomfortable, she didn't flinch. She quoted a sharecropper who once told a Smithsonian official, "Tell the people both what they want to hear and what they need to hear. That is the entire job description of a public historian in one sentence. What they want to hear and what they need to hear." The institutions being targeted in this hearing have spent decades doing exactly that. And what Frost exposed, methodically, question by question, is that the people attacking them cannot tell the difference between discomfort and dishonesty. They are treating, "This makes me uncomfortable," as evidence of bias. That is not how history works. That is not how truth works. The discomfort you feel standing in front of an exhibit about the Middle Passage or a photograph from the aftermath of a lynching is not a failure of the museum. It is the museum operating at the highest possible level. The day we decide that national institutions should only tell stories that make visitors comfortable is the day those institutions stop being museums. They become something else, and the word for that something else is propaganda. Here is the thing I keep coming back to. Gonzalez didn't lose that hearing because Frost was louder or angrier or more passionate. He lost it because Frost was more prepared. Because Frost understood that you don't beat a political operative by fighting on their terms. You beat them by exposing the gap between the authority they're claiming and the expertise they actually have. And then you let them fill that gap themselves, with their own words, in their own voice, on the record. Democracy doesn't run on elections alone. It runs on a shared, honestly maintained record of what actually happened. Attack the institutions that preserve that record, and you don't just rewrite the past. You make the future easier to manipulate. That is what was on the table in that room. And a congressman from Florida, with a list, a standard, and 3 devastating questions, made sure the record reflected it. If this felt like more than a political argument to you, that's because it was. Subscribe and share this video. These are the moments that get buried in the news cycle. They shouldn't be.